Hello and welcome to Ho Chi Minh City, also known as Saigon. Ho Chi Minh City is located in South Vietnam and has a very rich history dating back thousands of years. But to talk about the most recent history, we'll talk about the Western influence and the French influence. And the French were here during the colonial era, which began in around the 1860s. And first of all, Ho Chi Minh City has about 8.6 million people in it. It's a pretty big city. In fact, it's the largest city in Vietnam. As I mentioned, the French were here. They arrived here in 1859, and along with the Spanish, which a lot of people don't know, along with the Spanish, they took over Saigon, and that's kind of where it got the name Saigon. And if you look around this city, there are remnants of French colonial culture with the buildings and a lot of they have some churches here, cathedrals. French is a Catholic country, and you have a lot of just houses that you can tell that it come from the French influence. So it's very interesting, and that's part of what makes Vietnam and South Vietnam an interesting place due to the French Indochina, which was from the 1860s to 1955, and that is when the Vietnam War actually began. I mean, it's debatable, but that's when it began. The way I see it, that's when it began. That's the way a lot of historians kind of look at it. And I'm not going to talk too much about the Vietnam War, but I'm going to mention it. Speaking of which, the Vietnam War, as I said, 1955 to 1975, the French they were ousted, and then shortly after that, Ho Chi Minh. There was South Vietnam, it was North Vietnam. South Vietnam was more of a capitalist, free market society, democracy. North Vietnam, of course, was communist with Ho Chi Minh as the leader. And shortly after the French were ousted, around in the 1950s, that is when Ho Chi Minh and the North Vietnamese tried to invade South Vietnam. Well, they did, and they tried to reunify the country, which eventually they did. So the Americans showed up in the early 1960s, and we all know about the Vietnam War. We all learned about it, but you haven't heard. Most of us, at least American people, have not learned about the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective, and that is why you should absolutely come to Ho Chi Minh City and see the War Remnants Museum, because it is absolutely fascinating just to see everything you learned in school and from Vietnam veterans, and from people all around you, and from movies and documentaries that you watch about the Vietnam War. When you learn about it from another perspective, it gives you a whole new scope on things. And I'll talk about that more on my blog when I write about it. War Remnants Museum, that's my #1 tourist attraction here. I was looking so forward to seeing that, and I did. I made a short video of it. I'll also put together like a small mini documentary about it. Anyway, speaking of tourism, the Bitexco Financial Tower is a sign of the prosperity and the progress that Vietnam has made due to foreign investment and the growth of their economy. Independence, the Reunification Palace. It's officially the Independence Palace, but they also call it the Reunification Palace. It was called the Independence Palace due to the independence from the French in the 1950s. But after the Americans left Vietnam and were pushed out in 1975, Viet Cong tanks come crashing through the gates. I believe it was April 30th, 1975, and that unofficially ended the Vietnam War. Okay, 1976 is when the country was unified and became one, and then there was no South and North Vietnam. It was all just Vietnam. As I mentioned, the War Remnants Museum is absolutely. It's very difficult to go in there and see that and see some of the stuff that they have up there because it makes the Americans look like the bad guys. And we're taught in America that the Americans were supposed to be freedom fighters, and we're supposed to be saving the South Vietnamese from the North Vietnamese. And so when you see it from a different angle, it's very difficult, especially if you're a Vietnam veteran. I'm sure that people like that who show up here and see that, they probably can't even go through the whole museum. It's probably just too difficult for them. You also have the Opera House, which is very famous. The Opera House is also, I think it was built by the French, okay? And also you have the post office, which was designed by Gustave Eiffel, and we all know who that is because of the Eiffel Tower. And so there's actually 3 or 4 different. There's a couple bridges and a couple buildings that were inspired, that were designed by Gustav Eiffel. So it's really something when you go in there and you see that. That's actually across the street from the Saigon Notre Dame Cathedral, okay, which was built by the French. You have the Cuchy tunnels, which you got to go it's kind of a long way to get there. You could take a river cruise and get there, and that was part of the Vietnam War. You know, they used the tunnels to go underground. I mentioned the Saigon Notre Dame Cathedral. I took a Heineken tour. It was above the sky deck at the Bitesco Tower, and you know, they have a helipad up there. But I saw the sky deck earlier in the day, and at night I went and did a Heineken tour, the world of Heineken, and it was absolutely awesome. I'm not a drinker, but it made me want to drink. Going through the Heineken experience and seeing how they brew the beer, and you know, they had games in there you could play, and they had a bar and all that stuff, and music, commercials about Heineken, and just everything Heineken. And I was in Europe about a month ago in Amsterdam, so that's what made it even cooler. Heineken has a big stake here in Vietnam. Anyway, Ho Chi Minh City, also known as Saigon, come check it out. Vietnam is a wonderful place. It's very progressive, and one of these days I'm going to do a Saigon to a Hanoi trip, either by land or by river or whatever, but probably do it by land. And also see Da Nang, which is in the central part of the country. And Vietnam is awesome. Come check it out. Peace out. Ho Chi Minh City, about 8:30 in the morning. Lower 70s, aka Saigon. I'm on the 12th floor, the rooftop of my hotel, the Elios Hotel. It's going to be a nice day today.